Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Julia. She had long ago gotten used to the fact that some envious people in the village called her a cripple. What can I say? A wheelchair has never made anyone look good. Well, what could she do then? She vaguely remembered the time when she was young and happy with her own husband. Peter, the couple married in their third year of medical school. She an up-and-coming internist, he a dentist, the hope, so to speak, and the brightest minds in medicine, but had lived together for a long 5 years after their marriage. When Julia was walking home from work one evening and met her old friend, Tony, her first childhood love, with whom she lived in the same house, though on different floors, and with whom she had spent her entire childhood, her school years. And then you met him and married him. Tony often blamed her for Julia marrying Peter and moving to another town. Tony, but you know I love him. And you're my best friend. I invited you to the wedding, by the way, and you never shut it up. Who's supposed to take offense to that? Come on, you know how I feel about your husband, don't you? I don't. After what he did to you on the 3rd or 5th date, I'm sorry, but you should have thought about it by now. And really, Peter went crazy on the 5th date. He got jealous of Tony and raised his hand to the girl in front of witnesses. She only got a slap on the wrist, but maybe Tony's right. She should have thought about it from the start. Is her boyfriend really that good? Is this toxic relationship worth continuing? Tony, let's just change the subject. I just came over for tea and to talk about life. How are you doing anyway? Yeah, I'm good. Yesterday, my boss offered me the job of chief accountant. And I'm still thinking yes or no. What's there to think about? You'll be counting my money later. Yeah, you tell me, when was the last time you were at work or after your husband beat you up and made a scene at work? Did you quit? Yeah, that incident set the line between Julia and Tony. Although what to say, the girl from the first day won the respect and trust of both her patients and superiors, senior doctors, kindness, ability to spread to herself, and listen to many knowledge and ability to accurately diagnose. All this made her popular among old ladies. Yes to her, Julia. There is a clue lined up for you again, the superintendent used to say to her when she was making her morning rounds. Yes, Julia, again I'm without lunch and will sit until evening. But you understand, I know that besides me no one will listen to them, will not believe. Pressure will not prescribe the right treatment. Yes, I have an old man here. And so he comes to me every day like to work, all because he lives alone and has no one to talk to. Julia, you're doing great. And Julia blossomed at work among the old guys in the women's group. But apparently, Peter thought otherwise and saw his girlfriend, and then his wife blossom before his eyes. Even in such a seemingly backward society. Julia, confess, you have a lover at work. Is it a young grad student or a new doctor? Peter, don't be silly. You're the only man I have, the first and the last. You're all I have. And she reached out to him for a kiss. But the man pushed her away and slapped her across the face. Yes, so hard that Julia hit her head on the door jamb and fell, hitting the corner of the table. The consequences were most unfortunate. Bruising, concussion, ER and ICU, and then she was fired from her job. She just couldn't work there. She couldn't stand the slanted stares of her coworkers, the pitying, wailing of her patients, and Julia had become disgusted with herself. Where did I go wrong? How could I let it be thought that I had a lover? Tony, help me out here. Julia, just get away from him. Come to my place. I've got a 3-bedroom, I live by myself. Vaughn, really with a cat. I'll give you a room. What are you holding on to Peter for? She didn't know what kept her with that man. Is it attachment, love, or desire? What desire to be a mother? Maybe it's a good thing she lost the baby after that blow. Otherwise, she simply did not know how to live her life. Then this word often came up in her vocabulary, but in no way helped to determine the future. Maybe she should divorce Peter, move in with Tony, and go back to work when the bruises and abrasions went away. Julia had been stupid to say that out loud, naively assuming that no one was home. Peter called her in the evening and said that after work he was going to a bar with his friends to have a beer and let her do what she wanted. It's happened a lot in the last 6 months. Constant drunkenness of the husband, his delays at work, meetings with girls. And it wasn't always coworkers. More and more often prostitutes. But on this particular evening, he came home early and heard something that wasn't meant for his ears. I wonder if that's the Tony who's your housemate. Peter, you're home early. I wasn't expecting you, I'm sorry. I didn't even have time to heat up dinner. Yeah, I can see you weren't expecting that. I'm surprised you managed to get your lover Tony out of the house. Must have been the bed. Yeah, well, that's a coincidence. When her husband heard something that wasn't meant for him, and strangely enough, Juliet actually changed the linens before he arrived and threw them in the wash. It was an evening she would remember for a long time. The blow to the face, the fall, then the bump against the corner of the table and the ambulance crash, and then Tony the wheelchair and the incomprehension of how she could have gotten to this point. Julia, you should not despair. You are a doctor yourself, and you know very well that you can still get back on your feet. Tony was with her the whole time she was in the hospital, sitting by her side, spoon-feeding her, reading books, taking her for walks in a wheelchair. The doctors themselves did not understand how it could be that a young and healthy girl could lose her legs from a trivial fall. How could she lose her legs? They just stopped listening to her. She was fine. They said the bruises would go away sooner than her stomach, and she'd be back on her feet. Come on, Ethan, thanks for the encouragement. But I'm a medical professional myself, and I realize that when you're nervous, your legs can fail. So we just have to wait it out. And Julia, I gave you a sick leave so you wouldn't lose your job and have some money, and there. And if anything, I'll get a pension and go somewhere in the village to fresh air and fresh milk. With such words, she consoled herself, but she understood perfectly well she could not stand on her feet, and all her life would be confined to a wheelchair. That's how her husband ruined her youth, her health, and her desire to become a mother. When Peter beat her, Julia was pregnant. She didn't know it yet, but her husband's hand aborted her, robbing her of the joy of motherhood. It was later that she found out that while she was out, the doctors had given her a clean bill of health. I'm sorry, she's not you, you know. It was a little early. And how would you bear a pregnancy now? How would you raise a child? The girl herself did not know how she could just survive, bear, give birth, just to take care of the baby. What to say to all this? Maybe it's true that everything turned out that way then. After all, if Peter was raising his hand on her, then surely the baby would suffer as well. She just nodded her head and, turning the stroller, drove out of the chief physician's office. Her colleagues supported her, some with money, some with food, some just dropped by for a 5-minute chat. But Tony, it's not the same communication. It's not the same life I used to have. It's all that to me. Don't tell me you're sick of it and you're gonna go headfirst. But at the very least, off a bridge and into a river. What about me? You'll leave me to my fate, to the mercy of my accountants. Her friend could always cheer her up, if only for a moment, but it would make her smile. Although it was just Tony, whom Julia did not perceive as a man, as a lover and husband, although she realized he would be faithful not only as a friend, but also as a loving husband, a wonderful father, and even an excellent lover. Why did she think so? I myself did not understand. I'd never even slept with him once in my life. Life had given them only one kiss, but that was it. A friend, nothing more. Tony, I don't know how I'm supposed to go on. Just sitting in my mom's 3-bedroom apartment like this. Going from room to room in a stroller, looking out the window and enjoying the sunshine. I'm just going crazy. And it's only summer. What happens when fall and winter come? I'll go crazy. Julia, I take it you don't want to come to me. Then I'll give you another idea. My grandmother left me a house in the country. True, it's not an apartment with Euro renovation, but the structure itself is good. There's a stove. And by the way, it'll be great for your spine and legs. Then there's water. By the way, it's brought into the kitchen, though it's cold. Then there's a small vegetable garden, but a huge garden. And Tony smiled at his memory of spending all his summers at his grandmother's house. Those were the best days of his life. He would run with his friends to the river, fish at the local lake. Paris apples in the garden were his breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And how good was sleep in the hayloft? And how good was the bread from the oven? Tony, I'm not much of a villager. Me and the village. Who will bring me firewood? Who will bring me groceries? I don't know. Maybe I'll get sick. And then what? Well, you're a doctor yourself. And by the way, there's a neighboring village in need of a therapist. You know, in villages, doctors are a luxury. Will you be needed there? You'll be welcomed with open arms. The chairman has a car. He'll drive you around if necessary, and he'll buy food and bring it himself. I don't even know, though I'm sick of sitting around. I've been at home for the second year without any progress. And Julia shrugged her shoulders, tormented by doubts. I'm tired of sitting at home, but to go to the village as a doctor. Will she be able to cope? Who will help her? If anything, where? Who would want to take an invalid? Tell me, how does your disability affect your ability as a brilliant therapist? It doesn't. Patients come in, they tell you everything. You listen to their blood pressure, send them for tests, and then diagnose them. You're a brilliant diagnostician. To you, people sign up for 6 months in advance. The girl tilted her head with a smile. Yes, it was so long ago that she couldn't even remember. And Tony put his hand on her palm, resting on the warm shoulders that were wrapped around her legs, and looked into her eyes. Let's make a deal like this while it's fall-winter and still March. I think you'll stay at home. Replenish your knowledge of medicine. What and how. But in April, I'll take you to the village, show you the house. Then I'll introduce you to the head of the local village council and show you the outpatient clinic. And then it's up to you. What do you want to do? I agree. Julia nodded and mentally imagined herself a village doctor. On the one hand, what does she have to lose? And so the job is a change of scenery, a salary after all. And the small disability pension she receives is not enough. And the girl nodded her head. It was good that at least she had him, or without Tony she would be completely lost. She didn't know what to do. Tony, I agree, but I don't think it will work out. That's a good idea. I'm handicapped. No. And the girl is a wonderful person and a professional. And just because you're in a chair, it doesn't mean anything to me. Tony, don't be ridiculous. You're a young, handsome guy, but why do you need me and what are you going to do? I won't give you an heir. I'll be a burden. Even though you're my friend, I won't be a burden to you. All right, I'll put it another way. If you were walking, you'd be with me, you'd leave Peter. If I walked, I'd leave him. I'd be naked. And then Julia cried. After all, about the fact that she lost a child and in the future, most likely, will not be able to have children. She hadn't told anyone. And now the memories came flooding out. There was no way she could stop the tears. A friend, don't shed tears for one fool. He's not worth it. I'm not talking about Peterloo tears. Tony, you know I haven't told anyone. You see, I can't have kids. Well, not like that. When Peter hit me and I fell, I had a miscarriage. But it was so small, I didn't know I was pregnant. The doctors cleaned it up, of course, but I'm just not sure I can get pregnant. You don't know, or that's what the doctors told you based on the test results. Toll, I'm an excellent diagnostician who can even diagnose himself. And I understand that even if you conceive, how to carry the baby. And who'd want to take a handicapped person? Only a pervert, probably. Julia, you must have really hit your head that hard then, on all your brains. I like you. Don't you realize that? And I want to be with you. Even if you spend the rest of your life spinning the wheels of that wheelchair, I'll carry you in my arms. You can't conceive. Let's do the echo. It won't help the adoption. It'll just be with me. The words sounded so convincing that the girl looked at her old friend for the first time. On the other side, as a man. She, wiping the tears from her face, took a tissue and blotted it again with water under the tap face. Tony, are you really, really serious about this? Is there any other way, or do you know me? It wasn't the first day, but she closed her eyes and rested her head on the back of the stroller, touching her head to the cold tile. It helped her to collect her thoughts, to focus, to realize from scratch to herself what she really cared about, what her exhausted body and soul wanted. Tony, I am grateful for your help and all that you have done and are doing. But let's not rush things. I need to figure things out on my own. She opened her eyes and looked at the guy who sat across from her and smiled his charming smile. Julia instinctively reached out to him and pinched both cheeks, but just like a small child. Yes, in fact, he was a little boy to her. Even though he was only a week younger than her, that's fine. Now let's get dressed and go for a walk. It's a beautiful September. We shouldn't miss what nature has to offer. It was a beautiful fall day, which Julia remembered for a long time. Because today she was reborn anew, looked at Tony in a new way, realized that she was still alive and that she could be, even if not as a mother, but as a wife and a friend and a specialist. It was not without reason that she had studied for almost 6 years, and she had a lot of practice. A lot of people talk about her as a great professional. "Tony, you know what I was thinking," the girl said when the guy brought her home. "I guess I'll go into my old job this week and ask for a practice to restore my knowledge. I'll wash ducks and take test tubes if I have to. You don't need legs for that kind of work, but hands. You see, you're starting to think soberly, and everything will come to your senses. As for Peter, my advice to you is to sue him. No, you know what happened last year. The statute of limitations expired. That's what my chief of staff told me at work. Although, like you advised me to sue my husband. But I'll be honest, Peter was helping me out with money at the time. Yeah, and he crippled you. Okay, Julia, it's up to you. You're a smart girl." Yes, I am, Julia thought. Which she washed in life under a stream of warm water. In the converted shower, she went to sleep. If she was smart, she would definitely not allow that he raises his hand on her. Although what's done is done, you have to live with it, dearie. She didn't let Anya go. She's a wreck on the beach. And you're all at my wedding. The girl lay on the bed and thought maybe and really divorce Peter to live in the village, develop legs, and maybe even get pregnant. With whom? Anyone, even my old friend. There aren't many men around. I'm still young and attractive, and I'll get on my feet. So with these thoughts, she closed her eyes and instantly blacked out. She fell into a deep sleep without noticing. That night, she was running along the same beach again. Like back in first grade, when she was given a trip to the sea from the school. How blissful was that? To run on the sand like that, her feet, and we were languidly on the warm sea. And all around was sun, wind, and freedom. The girl didn't notice how she woke up crying. Her pillow was wet, and the clock showed only 3 o'clock. Julia rose on her arms and looked out the window. The moon was accurately illuminating her bed, and in its rays the fall leaves were twirling. It was like a waltz when 1, 2, 3 and twirled in a magnificent dance to the brilliant melody of Bach or Schubert. She adored music and more than once put at home records Soviet old turntable devalued around the room. But it annoyed Peter, although the girl herself did not understand why. Why does it annoy you? It's a classic. That's what annoys the classics. And I'm not all of them. I will never be like the common herd of sheep. I'm unique and special. And one day, in a fit of rage, he smashed her old record player, stomped on the records with his feet. And she stood there and watched and couldn't do anything. She didn't understand why. She just stood there and watched her hobbies being trampled on. And now she understood it was a kind of dependence on her husband, a manifestation of love, a sacrifice to her executioner. And Derry got something. Probably a new blank sheet of paper from which to write her future. And she lay down again, just turning the pillow wet side down. So what if it was wet? Tears are water, and water has a way of drying up and evaporating. And you, Peter, are definitely out of my life. Enough. Julia moved to a small village in the middle of April and did not regret it for a minute. Yes, it turned out to be quite a picturesque place, just as Tony had promised. A small house, but quite sturdy and cozy with 2 rooms and a hall, kitchen, and entrance hall. A large garden behind it, and around it endless fields covered with the first green grass. After the urban metropolis, it seemed like some other unreal world. Well, you're a lucky girl. Spring is early and warm this year, even without rain. By the way, here are the keys to the gate of the house. Keep and possess. And be your rightful owner, if I was on my feet. But I'm not much of a hostess, am I? There's a huge garden. And a vegetable garden. They need care and supervision. What can I do? You can keep your spirits up and at least look after it. Pick the fruit. And nature is like that. You know, smart aunt, look and the tree will give birth. Julia smiled at her friend and put her face under the warm spring breeze and the first real rays of sunshine. How nice is it here? It's not her apartment, where she was locked up like in a prison and didn't want to see anything or anyone. Now she could have a cat in the house. Maybe even some chickens. What's in there? She can feed them. And then there's the truth. What kind of household would have more rabbits? Can she buy milk from the neighbors? Tony, you know, I want to have chickens here, even a cat. And then you can help me with that. No problem. Come on, I'll introduce you to the head of the village council first. He, by the way, I saw in the car, came to the local medical center. And there on the spot we will organize and chickens, and firewood, and help around the house. The house is fine, but the yard should be cleaned up. Everything is overgrown. There the bushes grew wildly. Let's go. That's all later. Already on the spot at the local medical center I saw her. I noted that everything here is done quite well and clean to the best of my ability, and the equipment is not new, but working. The medicines are stacked properly, right? You can feel the hand of the manager, which pleased her immensely. So we'll work together, she thought. Tony, hi. What brings you here? The voice of a short, stocky man distracted the girl from her inner musings. Andrew, I brought you a general practitioner. If you take Julia under your care and protection, Andrew, the local council leader, will help you with everything. Good afternoon, the lovely Julia. I'm delighted to meet you and also delighted that we'll have our own therapist. Because you know how poorly we have it in this area. It's horrible. 2 nurses and a driver. That's the whole staff. How do you manage? Julia, I was genuinely surprised at the way the work is done here and how people manage without proper training. Beautiful Julia, I'm ready to carry you in my arms. Just stay with us. You're our salvation and our help. You're already settled in, by the way. Andrew naively thought she had already agreed. But how can you work in such a mode and with such a set? Julia just didn't understand and already inwardly doubted whether she should stay here. But she was not used to giving up, so she smiled at the head of the village council and simply said, Yes, Tony has taken me in his house, but I really need your help to organize the yard. It's overgrown. I need wood to clean the stove, and so to speak, my personal request, if you can, chickens and a ginger kitten. No problem, Julia. By lunchtime, you will have a man with mow the grass, clean the yard, then tomorrow we'll take care of firewood and stove, and they're smoothly moved to the garden. You have firewood for the first couple days? Yes, thank you, but we'll organize the chickens. We can ask around the neighbors. Didn't any of them grow up dry? My man will see the condition of the hen house, bring you some food, and we'll think about kittens. By the way, you would also need a small dog in the yard or in the house to run and bark like a bell. Julia smiled. It's true. Well, how in the village without a dog? No way. She already imagined how from the morning she would feed the hens, give porridge with dog's meat, how she would pet the cat and go to the garden to drink her morning coffee. No, her Julia shook her head and mentally already stayed here. After all, how stupid was she to have stayed in the city for so long? She should go to the air, to nature, develop her legs, and forget about Peter could already walk on her own 2 feet. I'm sorry, she's not up for anything you said. Andrew tilted his head closer so he could hear her better. No, I'm sorry, Andrew, it's nothing. Just thinking out loud. It's okay if I call you by your first name. I'd be happy for you to call me by my first name. That's so wonderful to hear. Andrew, from a girl like you. Come on, I'm not a girl anymore, and a wheelchair doesn't make me look good. You know, I've always been a sensible man. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The main thing is the mind, and the body is harmful. Excuse me, but how come Andrew shouldn't ask now? You'd better help the girl to get settled, and then you'll ask questions over a cup of tea. Tony made it clear to his head that the topic was delicate enough that he shouldn't be so gung-ho about the new therapist. Julia, I apologize if my question offended you. But you understand, we have a priest in the neighboring village, So he's talking about the beginning. Andrew, sorry, let's not talk about your mysticism. And all of a sudden, Tony tilted his head up to the sky and rolled his eyes. He had heard this story about the local priest from the head of his village more than once. They say he has the gift of healing, cures cancer, exorcises demons, and so on. People even come to him in droves, coming from cities and almost from neighboring countries. And here he is right next door. Just take it. Tony, that's where you're wrong. He gets people back on their feet, by the way. You should go to the temple. Oh, sorry, when you're settled in, I'll take you there. It's a beautiful place. Even artists come from the capital to sketch there. So you won't regret it. And communion with God, thank you. But probably a little later. And I can't say that I'm a particularly religious person. Doctors and priests are like two opposing camps, each with their own truth. Yeah, it's like Spartacus and Dynamo fans. I agree with you, dear girl, but still we come to it. But that's for later. Now let's go to my office. I'll feed you lunch and we'll talk about it. What do you want in the house and what do you want in your dispensary? It was near evening in the flooded house when Julia and Tony sat at the table and had dinner. We discussed working points, what was needed, how much, how to organize the work. It was like that. Tony, it's all so cool. I haven't felt this good since I entered the institute and met Peter. But she immediately faltered when she read the grimace of displeasure and misunderstanding on Tony's face. Yes, Isabella, the way he used to raise his hands at you. And he probably wanted to say that it was probably his fault she was in a wheelchair now. But he didn't. He felt sorry for hurting and so exhausted both soul and body. So he just got up and walked out of the room into the yard. It was so desirable to smoke. But the guy gave up this habit about 3 years ago, although a pack of cigarettes in his bag or in his car was always there. He went back to the car and rummaged through the glove compartment, pulled out cigarettes and took them out. One he lit. A few minutes later, he heard the squeak of wheels. That's right. Julia pulled into the street to see where he was. Tony, I'm sorry. I understand that mentioning Peter annoys you, but let's not make a big deal out of it. I'm trying to get over him, but so far I'm not doing a very good job. Yeah, I know, but I hate to see you like this. Then don't look. Then why did you bring me here to get out of my sight? She swung the baby carriage around angrily and, misjudging her strength and the country roads, tipped over, falling sideways. Tony did not have time to pick her up, and Julia fell to the ground with a thud and flew out of the stroller, crying like a little girl from resentment and pain. No pain at all. More like resentment that Tony had said that to her. He knew how she reacted to every remark he made. It was one thing for a stranger to say it. It's another thing if it's said by a friend who knows everything and anything. Julia, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. I'm sorry. Darling, you're my man. Tony, how can I forgive you when she was choking with anger and tears? If you blame me for my disability, how do you work with people after that? How do you get them back on their feet? Well, I'll tell you straight up that you're in the way now. Your own professionalism, work with disabilities, or you or me to tell you how many great doctors, being almost at death's door, put others on their feet. And this village needs your bright head. There are 2 assistants plus a driver with a car. She looked up at him from below and could not hold back the tears that rolled down her cheeks. Toto neatly put the stroller, also neatly put the girl in it, and without saying a word, just drove her friend into the house. Already there he transferred her to a bench near the stove and began to take off his sneakers, then dirty and muddy pants, sweater, despite Julia's fierce resistance. So don't even think about resisting. I'll bring you, by the way, the other day, washed and connected. There's water in the house, so you won't have to do it by hand. Nothing fell off the stroller, but the crown won't. Julia, but really, I'm sorry about what I said. It won't happen again. Let me put you on the stove to warm up and try to sleep. I'll stay with you for a couple of days while you get organized. What about your work? She looked at her friend in surprise. She knew how important it was to him. I just took a week at my own expense. I'll take another if I have to. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. It's important for me to get you settled in here and be comfortable. That you have everything you need. You've got firewood and food for at least a couple weeks. You got a cat and a dog and chickens. What else do you want? Then my boss knows exactly where I am and who I'm with. And by the way, he says hello and thank you very much. Thanks for what? I didn't remind my boss of Tony, but I just didn't understand what he was thanking her for. Yeah, he brought his wife to you, who couldn't get a diagnosis. And you knew right off the bat that she had cancer. And it's a good thing they detected it in time, punctured her, didn't let her die a horrible death. What's he talking about? Come on, it's my job. By the way, did you know that dogs and cats can detect cancer cells by smell? I've heard of it. I've even read about it. It's like the Americans have adopted this technique in hospitals. Now we're not America. At least we've got this outpatient clinic to deal with. Okay, I know there's a few charitable organizations in town. I'll contact them. I'll get them to drop off some equipment, medical supplies, and bandages. I understand summer's a hot time in the village. Oh yes, you'll have a lot of work to do. This one's got blood pressure, the other one's got early slopes, the third one's got shovel blisters, and so on and so forth. Wait till you see this. The local women from the neighboring villages will start asking you to marry their sons and grandsons. Believe me, that's a separate topic of conversation. Tony, are you really joking? The girl looked at her friend attentively and on her hands, having risen, settled down on the stove. No, believe me, in our villages there are 5 women per 10 men. That's the statistics. And believe me, your legs are not a judgment. If a man loves you, it's in a city where there's only silicone and eyelash extensions. Guys choose their girlfriends on principle. How much money is invested in her? And here in the villages is important natural beauty without embellishments. And believe me, for many your legs will not be an obstacle. Like for you? Did you just realize that now? Tony smiled and gave her a big, and in the rank to cover her legs and stroked her hand. He had loved this girl for a long time, even after she stopped walking. And the disability hadn't turned him away in any way, hadn't broken him for a minute. Only gave him an even greater desire to care for her, not to become her protector. I am your knight, and may it be without end. But at that moment, the front doors in the hay creaked and soft, light footsteps were heard. Tony and Julia looked at each other. They were definitely not expecting anyone today, and now they had an uninvited visitor. Good evening to this house. Neighbor Wendy's voice sounded loud and even resounding throughout the small house. Good evening, Grandma Wendy. How are you? How's your health? Tony was glad to see a neighbor he hadn't seen in 5 years. And by your prayers, Tony, I heard you had a doctor come to see us. That's good. We need doctors. I hear you need a cat for your house. Well, I brought you a kitten from my cat Red. Will you take it? We'll take Wendy. I don't know what your middle name is, I'm sorry. Julia said to her, looking out for matches. So it's you. Good evening again. Just call me Wendy. What's your name? Julia. Just Julia. I'm sorry I'm not meeting you on my feet. It's just my feet on wheels over there in the corner. The grandmother immediately realized that the new medically disabled. But she didn't show her surprise with any words or facial expressions. She was a wise woman who had delivered babies, but now she was no longer in good health, although she still had her wit and experience. It's all right, Julia, I understand you're Polish by nationality. Not by nationality, but by my father. He's Polish, and my mom is a native of St. Petersburg. So that's how I got my international mix. It's okay. It's good to have 2 nations together. And for your legs. But don't worry, we'll put you on them. Get out of here. You know, we've got a lot of holy places here, and the land is fertile. Build it with your bare feet and you'll feel the power coming from it. Wendy, do you really understand that Julia is a doctor and all that? It's science. And here I am with my superstitions. Here's my superstition. The red cat will be, believe me, a great rat catcher. And the grandmother took out a beautiful red kitten, which she immediately handed to me with joy. The girl almost jumped from the stove on her own 2 feet. After all, she had dreamed of such a miracle for a long time. And here it was, brought straight home. The cat looked at her carefully and flashed, started quietly muttering Julia under a warm hand stroked, lice it on the head. What a big kitten. Can you feel the breed? I've got a cat. What do you want? My son brought her to me. He says she's a purebred Siberian cat. Mirka's alive, but my son's long gone. That's the legacy of my boy, and the old woman turned away. I quietly wiped away a tear, reflected on life, and Tony and Julia just fell silent for a moment. Wendy, do you happen to have any extra chickens for the household? We need to teach the metropolis the joys of rural life. Yes, please, even 10, I'll pay you the money. The girl was glad that her neighbor could help her so easily. Although, Tony, I don't have a chicken coop yet, and I don't have any feed. I do have chickens. I'll be able to give them to you in 2 weeks. They're still small. Let them grow up. My chickens are great dryers. So you'll always have homemade crates. Can you order feed from our head? He buys for the whole village. Thank you. Why did you have your blood pressure taken? Or do you have any complaints? Julia's professional sense has kicked in. My girl, I came to you not as a patient, but as a neighbor. But I'll come to the reception, but only as soon as you get settled both at home and in your hospital. Then I'll complain. But for now, she put milk, bread, and homemade on the table for you. The old woman put a bag on the table and began to take out food from it. By the way, Tony, give me a small plate for the cat. I'll pour him some milk. Let him get used to his new home. And if the little guy runs away, don't worry. He'll probably run to his mama's house and talk to the young ones for a few more minutes. Grandma went home and Julia and Tony went to bed. What was there to say? The day had been full of events, of emotions, of getting to know each other. But strangely enough, it was in this house on the stove that Julia slept as sweetly as she had never slept. Even at home, she dreamed of the sea. And once again, she was running down the beach on her own feet. Julia, wake up, girl. What's wrong? Tony's voice sounded as if from far away, and the girl didn't immediately realize she was still asleep. Tony, I'm sorry. What happened? The girl's voice sounded sleepy and somewhat annoyed. After all, she was sleeping so sweetly. You were crying in your sleep and moaning. I woke you up, but I'm sorry. I dreamt of the sea and the beach. I was running on the sand. It's a good thing I woke you up. Are you going to lie down again, or are you going to get up? And what time is it? I didn't look at the clock and was surprised. It was almost 12 o'clock. Wow, she's been asleep for almost 12 hours. Oh, I'm so hot. I've never slept that long. This place is really nice. It's easy to sleep. No nightmares. Tony, help me into the stroller. I gotta get up, wash up, feed the cat, and I gotta go to the outpatient clinic. You probably forgot it's Sunday. I fed the cat a long time ago. As far as sleeping on the stove while I'm here, that's fine. But when I'm gone, you'll have to sleep on the bed. Who's gonna carry you back and forth? Only me. Come on, go wash up and have breakfast or lunch. I've got it all ready. Yeah, Peter never fed me breakfast. He waited for me to cook. And if you don't, it's on you, Julia. You get a big slap in the face. And here it's just like that. Breakfast on the table and the cat's fed. And the furnace is fueled. Yeah, Tony, you know how to make a woman feel good. And without straining and without thinking about intimacy with the usual movement of your hands. Julia pulled up his pants, changed his shirt, and then slipped matches, for example, and pulled up a wheelchair, sat down through. First one leg, then the other, and then she drove out into the yard. Isn't it beautiful? It's beautiful. The words from the famous movie came to mind. But what can you do if it was really so? And Julia smiled quietly to herself. The cat immediately jumped into her arms and looked carefully into her face, as if asking what plans her mistress had for today. And there are no plans. It will be necessary, though, to inspect the garden, the henhouse, and everything in the yard. You're with me, kitten, as if understanding her words. Immediately the motivation hinted, jumped from her hands, and with all the vigor rushed into the garden. The garden to see the henhouse. The yard is good, but do you even eat, then? Tony stood on the doorstep and looked at his friend carefully. He regretted that he had asked her to live in the village like that, but it had seemed like a wonderful idea to him at the time, away from her ex-husband. Fresh air, natural products, no gas. But now he was standing there, thinking that he should first put the house in order, think about the car, refrigerator, groceries, and then take the invalid, how she would be here on her own. You know, she doesn't have to. I'll leave you my old cell phone. I'm sorry, I haven't gotten a new one yet. You'll call me every morning and evening. You promise. I bought it myself. I had to get the house cleaned up before I could bring you here. But now I'm here eating fine eyeballs and talking to you. But Tony, don't think about it. Trust me, I'm not that weak. That's a first. Plus there's a job, and there's people, and a car. So who's there to turn to in case of emergency? You know, it's a good thing the job came right out of the blue. In fact, it's a plus for you. In time, maybe then you'll go to the city. It's better to translate than to start from scratch. I said that and only then thought that words could offend my friend. So immediately bit my tongue and simply ducked into the plate. And Julia herself realized that the guy wanted the best. But it turned out as usual. Oh well. I mean, maybe you should be less reactive to words. You gotta get used to it. Girl to the fact that you will not get up. But at the second legs, as if pierced by a charge of current, and Julia, from surprise, shrieked and dropped the fork. What happened? Tony stood up from his seat in surprise. Nothing. It was just something that pricked Julia's heart. She didn't want to say that her legs were electrocuted. Don't entertain the hope that they might regain their sensitivity. That's the connection I had to the temple. Well, the one the head of the collective farm mentioned yesterday. In principle, it's possible. But let's do it next weekend. Just this morning, a man from the village council came to see the hen house. He said it was good, only that it needs some repairs and left to get some materials. So we should be here by 2 o'clock or so. So we go to the temple or wait for the master to repair the hen house. But of course, the master is more important. And my future ones don't need a decent house. So they had breakfast, though it was more like lunch. They chatted merrily. And the girl more and more caught herself thinking that here she would settle down. And this place would bring her a lot of happiness, although she did not realize that here she could meet not only her happiness, but also revelations. The days flew like minutes of the week, like hours. Tony returned to town, promising to come back on weekends, and she stayed on her own. But why on her own, she said to herself as she escorted Tony over the threshold. There's the cat, and then there will be more hens. Now I'll have to get used to living in the village. Soon there will be hens. Really, Carrot the cat flashed and lost his head, and her chin. Yeah, here comes reality. But it's time to get started on the house. And there maybe she'll really get up and start walking Carrot Top. Why don't I go see a priest? Well, if it doesn't help you get back on your feet, then at least you'll confess. The cat trustingly knocked, as if agreeing, and began to rub her face, mewing in her ear his song. What a marvelous animal. Yes, and what a wonderful song. And anyway, why was she so opposed to coming here? I guess it's the fear of change that stops a lot of people. Though now she realized it was all for her own good. Rural life and everyday life spun the girl, and the work carried her away. So Julia sometimes forgot that she was in a wheelchair. What's to say? The talent of an excellent therapist and experienced doctor make her famous. To the new doctor lined up lines of sufferers. Julia, you're our star, the head of the village council once told her. By the way, read about you in the newspaper. And he handed her a newspaper bought in a neighboring district. And indeed, on the first page, there was a note that the new doctor of the village of such and such puts not only people on their feet, but is considered a great diagnosis. And the reason for this is one case in the village, a trivial case. But probably it is from such situations that local legends and stories are born. In one resident of a neighboring village, a girl first grader fell ill. For a long time, they could not establish an accurate diagnosis. The little girl was bothered by a woody cough. Everyone thought a cold, but it turned out to be a heart problem. And it's good that the diagnosis could be made in time, when the problem can be solved with medication and did not have to resort to surgery. There are many such situations, and there will be more. Julia thought. After all, she loved these places and these hard-working, kind people. Andrew, could you do me a favor? One day, Julia asked the head of the village council. Yes, my dear, beautiful visitor. Lord of my rheumatism, tamer pressure all I can. Could you take me to that temple you spoke of, where Father John rules? Is it true that he has some kind of power? Julia, and you tell me this. Are you a doctor? No, I'm sorry, he may have powers. What kind of power? But I've never heard anything about it. You really believe that? I'm sorry for asking. You know, your grandmothers and neighboring villagers have been telling me all about him. Believe it or not, maybe we should go. It's a good thing. Let's go. We'll be at the service this Sunday. See our beauty. And communion with God, you know. I don't know, but maybe he'll help me so I can walk again. Do you think I'll be your eighth wonder of the world? The priest laid his hands on her, and she got up and walked. Julia herself did not realize at that moment why she had spoken so disparagingly about the priest, about faith and God. Her mother and grandmother of the youngest had accustomed the girl to faith, but apparently the Soviet authorities and her studies at medical school had nullified all faith in miracles. Andrew stood next to her, looked at her intently, and asked Julia, "How did it happen that you are in a wheelchair?" "You won't believe it, but my husband beat me. I fell, hit myself, and lost not only my legs, but also my unborn child. I apologize if I hurt your feelings as a believer, but when a husband beats his wife, somehow my faith in God and higher powers fades to nothing. I do. You know, in our temple, Father John was disabled himself. Yeah, well, don't look at me so skeptical. Just like you had problems with your legs. From what I hear, he didn't ride in a wheelchair, but when he took it, it went away. But if you don't believe me, I won't bother you with these stories, but I'll take you. And I should go to the service myself. I've got things to do." And the head of the village council left her outpatient clinic. But on the threshold, he stopped and turned around and asked, "Did you and your husband get married?" Julia did not say anything. She just nodded her head negatively, and the man didn't say anything, but just lowered his head and went about his business. Yes, life is such an unpredictable thing that the greatest sorrow and the greatest happiness can happen to anyone. But already on Sunday at 9 o'clock, Andrew's car was parked near her house, and he, with a smile on his face in a new suit, knocked on the door of her Julia. "It's Andrew, open up. Taking you to the temple today, Andrew. Come in. I'll make tea and come out to you. You can stay in the kitchen. I've made pancakes. We'll have breakfast, if you don't mind." "I don't mind. But to tell you the truth, I ate a lot this morning. And we still have to drive 30 minutes on our roads. So if you don't want to be late for the most solemn part of the service, let's go well. I, in principle, also ate in the morning. So, as they say, load me into your carriage and let's go. My car hasn't been bought yet. It's probably waiting somewhere in the showroom, but with a salary like this, I won't see it soon." She was trying to make a joke, but it didn't work. "Julia, if you need transportation, don't hesitate to speak up. I can just forget to offer you my carriage, as you said. Because if you need to go to the city or something, just a whistle. Thank you, I'll say. I don't know how to whistle, to be honest." So they drove to the neighboring village. They joked and laughed merrily. Andrew understood perfectly well that he was carrying a fragile girl, plus an invalid, so he tried to drive slower so as not to shake on the local roads. Julia understood this and mentally thanked him, thinking that her ex-husband would probably have driven like a daredevil, not caring about her needs. As they entered the neighboring village, Andrew steered the car steadily along the southern road. In a couple of minutes, they were standing near a wooden church. What kind of church is it, though? A real work of art. It was a rather large church, made of a solid log cabin with high domes and gilded crosses. It is really beautiful, as birch trees grow around. By the lake, you can see the forest not far away, and all around are greenery, blue sky, and curious people's eyes. Julia, don't pay attention to people. Everyone may be staring at you right now. That's why I warn you at once not to take slanted glances to heart. The main thing is not to touch them with your hands. I'm used to everything else. Then let me help you into the stroller, grab my neck." Julia put her arms around Andrew's neck and mentally noted to herself, "He smells good. And how strong are his arms. You're a fool. In a wheelchair, you're looking at a man. But why not?" She looked up and their eyes met. They met. How blue are his eyes? That's just creepy. Andrew, how blue are your eyes? Like the sky, but you didn't come here to see my eyes. And people are already looking at us funny, even though you said to ignore them, or did you? Julia grinned playfully and looked at the man. He was old enough to be her older brother or even her father. But right now she looked at him like a woman who had long ago forgotten how to flirt, but remembered that she could be beautiful and desirable. A merry gaggle of cats, and the one for whom one rolls down mountains, performs feats, and all that. But really, as she looked around at the people standing around the temple, she noticed the people squinting at them. She clenched her fists, driving her nails under the elbow of her wheelchair, and raised her head high. Andrew, it's a good thing you can carry me in this wheelchair, or I probably wouldn't have made it. Or at least turn around and drive away. Well, if you could handle it, you could handle it. But as for leaving, yeah. But I want to show you our pride, this temple from the inside, and introduce you to Father John. He's your age, by the way. And if I'm not mistaken, this man used to be in the military. Now he's ruling. Before she could finish, a priest came around the corner and waved. Andrew waved back. There's our spiritual father. Good afternoon, Andrew. Good afternoon. And to you, Julia. It's good to see you in my temple. How do you know my name? Although, pardon me, that's probably a silly question for a priest. It's not stupid at all, but I'll tell you right away. It's not mystical. It's just that I've heard a lot about you. I was thinking of coming to see you myself. Julia wanted to make a joke, but then he didn't. It's not appropriate to joke about such things with a priest. No, just to get acquainted. After all, medicine and religion should go together. Don't you think so? I suppose so. But I'm sorry, Father, I was brought up in the era of developed socialism. That's why you're not friendly with religion. But still I came here. I've been told a lot about you. Probably that I have some kind of healing gift, the priest replied. But that's more your paraphilia. By the way, and about you are legends among my parishioners. You accurately diagnose, so it's kind of similar. But that's not what we're talking about. Come on in. The service is about to begin, and the priest gestured both of them into the temple. When Julia drove carefully into the wooden church, she was surprised by the beauty she had not seen for a long time, even in large churches. And here in an ordinary village, the icons are painted gold, and the right? Yes, her grandmother was probably right. When priests would walk like Christ with one stick and in one robe, then faith would be strong. But she did not say anything, but just stood on the baby carriages near the entrance and listened to John's sermon. Indeed, this priest had a lot of eloquence. I guess I could immediately see the KGB school, where rhetoric was at the highest level, as well as the ability to persuade. Well, that's probably the reason why there are such legends about this priest. But it's their bread, their job to turn Orthodox and unbelievers alike to Christ, to strengthen the faith and whatever it takes. What do you think of my sermon? Father John came up to Nina after the service and looked at her carefully. You know, it was impressive. I think even the most unbelievers would definitely become your parishioners. But I don't know if I'd be one of them. But faith is a thing. You know, you have to come to it. So no one's gonna force it on you. Although I'd love to have you among my friends at least. I'm glad, and frankly, I'd love to accept your offer of friendship. You might actually. Come see me in the outpatient clinic. As your blood pressure goes. Maybe I should prescribe you some vitamins. You have kids. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a silly question. You're a priest. It's all right, don't worry. But I'll definitely come back tomorrow if you don't mind. Julia nodded her head and only wanted to turn around and go to Andrew's car as her gaze fell on a man. Strange, she noted to herself. A painfully familiar back and gait in general. But she shook her head and drove on to the car of the head of the village council, justifying this similarity. And what can he do? My Peter is mine. She still considered him hers, though she had long ago tried to forget him. They had parted under not the best of circumstances, and Julia still wore the ring. And she can't even get to the registry office to file for divorce. Is it worth getting a divorce? Maybe everything can go on as it is. She grinned wickedly and let him chase me if he thinks of getting married a second time. I don't think he'll ever get a divorce. Never. Julia, I hope you didn't wait long for me. Did Andrew's voice bring her out of her own angry musings? No, it's okay. I'll at least get out of my little world called home. Work is great. How's the service, by the way? Hope you're not disappointed with your time. No, Andrew, if you don't mind coming down here, you should definitely take me with you. I really like it here. It's beautiful. You can really come here for sketches. A lot of people come here. Imagine, by the way, some of the paintings depict me. Just like our priest. Andrew, have you ever had it in this place that you look at a person from the back, and it seems to you that you have already seen him somewhere? I mean, it could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be here and now. And that you've met someone you know. Julia did not say that she had seen her husband's back, but just kept silent. She didn't pursue the topic herself, but the unpleasant residue remained. Though business and care of the house and the outpatient clinic made her forget about it. Although soon the girl again experienced a lot of unpleasant moments. And the reason for this was the fall holiday, which in the village it was customary to celebrate at the very beginning in the temple. Who does not know this holiday, when in the temple are carried to sanctify apples, honey, and nuts, which are loved by many? Julia, let's go to the temple. We should consecrate these first apples from your garden. You've done well, by the way. You've trimmed the trees, removed the old bushes and branches. Kudos and honor to you. But Andrew, it's not without your help. Julia once again caught herself thinking that Andrew liked her more and more, although the man himself was polite and all. He didn't try to pester her or somehow show his own desire, only the maximum of politeness, attention, and help. Though in fact, for that she was already grateful to him. After all, few people cared about her. Tony didn't count in this case. Yes, I take a little credit for that too. But it's still your labor, which is worth appreciating. And the cat has grown hens everywhere in the yard, and in the house you can feel the hand of the mistress. It's true that the house and the garden were cleaned. Everywhere you could feel the attention and care in all this. Julia put not a part of herself, but all of herself, and nature gave her much more gratitude in return. They drove to the temple and sweetly chatted about everything. And the girl did not even suspect what could happen to her that day, when Andrew helped her to get out of the car and get on the stroller. Julia turned it around with the usual movement of her hands and drove to the temple. Not waiting for her counselor, she knew full well that Andrew would not enter until he put the car in the church. In fact, he tried to drive as close to the entrance as possible to make it easier for his companion to get in. When Julia drove into the church, she looked for Father John with her eyes. The service had not yet begun, and it was possible to talk to him a little, as was usual before every service. But when she heard his familiar voice and turned around, and she almost fell off the stroller, Julia just couldn't believe her eyes. Standing next to the priest was her husband, and he was crying. He was really crying. Julia could see large tears rolling down his face, and his hands were trembling folded in the area of his chest. She sat in the stroller and could not believe her eyes. Her husband was here in the temple crying. There was no way that could have happened. Peter had never attended church, especially during their entire time together. He didn't cry. She hadn't seen a single tear on his face. Even when his mother had died, he'd been stingy with tears at the funeral, as well as any emotion. But could it be her hallucinations? A trick of the eye? Yes, it couldn't be. She remembered this man better than anyone else. And it hadn't been long enough since they parted to forget his profile, that favorite leather jacket of his. Come up and say hello. Why not? After all, she didn't really owe him anything. He's the one who got her into this state. Peter, is that you? Julia's words sounded to the man out of the blue and like a judgment on Julia. Is it really you? Have I changed so much that you don't recognize me? Or have I aged? Although the stroller does not add beauty, but I think you can recognize my face. What brings you here? I hope it's not to follow me. No, I'm sorry. I'm here to see my Father John on a personal matter. H. My husband has a personal matter that has nothing to do with taking care of his invalid wife. Julia, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you're in a wheelchair like this. But I'm here about something else. What is it? Julia didn't understand why she was interested in the private life of her husband, who had made her an invalid, but she couldn't stop herself. She didn't care about his problems. But most likely, it was a woman's curiosity that prevailed in this case. But her husband, strangely enough, did not react harshly to her harsh statement and just looked at her pitifully and walked away. Wow, thought Julia, what had happened to her husband? Previously, he would have simply torn her apart for such words. But now the girl did not know how to react. She didn't expect herself to be so brave. But turning around, she saw behind the back of Andrew Rural Head, who stood and with a hard expression, looked at all this. His gaze was the same as her ex-husband's. But, Andrew, you have heard everything, but I can introduce you in absentia. This is my ex-husband, or rather, still husband. We're just not divorced. And he's the reason I'm sitting here in a wheelchair right now. The man smiled and squatted down in front of Nina. He took her hands in his and kissed them, not realizing what he was doing. And then said quietly, you know, if he had said something bad to you, I would have killed him for sure. Here's a cross for you. And he crossed himself, and then he kissed her hands again. Andrew's treatment of her simply shocked her into a state of mild shock, and she blushed, like a freshman getting her first taste of light wine and kissing a guy. Like a grown woman, and so blushed with shame, Julia thought and simply tried to take her hands from Andrew's strong palms. You don't have to take your hands away. I didn't hurt you. By the way, John's father told me that you can, in fact, be put back on your feet. I wonder how. She wanted to be sarcastic, like, is this place prayed for? Or is there a special prayer? But she didn't. She didn't want to spoil such a beautiful moment. And by the way, she didn't care that people were standing around and looking at this couple as if they were mesmerized. The head of the village council and the invalid. No, he has a masseur he knows. He's a practicing guru or something. But he's the one who got him back on his feet after the tragedy. That's how I remember it. You said he was in the missile force somewhere, and not in the missile force, but in security, guarding a secret facility in a space town. Well, I guess it's not that simple. By the way, he promised to give me his phone number, but he said that he would contact him first to clarify whether he accepts patients or not. Where is he now? Do you think I have any chance of walking on my own legs? I think it's worth using any method, and as a medical man, you should know that. Now let's go into town. I know a great taco place, and they have a real Mexican chef. At the mention of food, Julia realized how hungry she was. And her stomach was charging so treacherously that the sound must have been heard by everyone around her. Yep, looking around. She looked at the people and saw that everyone was looking at her like she was a free circus. So be it. Andrew is a fine man and a fine man. Surely he's the one every woman from small to large is pining for. She proudly raised her head and turned the stroller and went to the car. Look, look, I'm not so helpless. Yes, the afternoon and evening had been charming. Great company and delicious tacos, a cozy cafe and Andrew nearby. But the minutes flew by like crazy. And only in the evening Julia remembered that she had to work tomorrow. And she looked at her watch and shrieked quietly. Oh, I have to work tomorrow, and it's so late. And the cat's home fed. And the chickens are affected by the costs of city life, when you are not responsible for anyone but yourself. Don't worry about it. I called your neighbor's grandmother, and she's been feeding everyone. I've got a car, and I'll take you home. How are you enjoying your evening, by the way? Andrew, you don't know how good I feel. I had a wonderful evening here. That's good. So you were able to forget about your husband, erase him from your memory. And that was the truth. She didn't even think about Peter for a minute. And Tony had kind of faded into the background. And the strangest thing was that she enjoyed Andrew's company. And the man himself seemed to enjoy her company. Andrew, please tell me if you like me. That's when I just sit like this and my mangled legs and the wheelchair are not visible. Warmed by wine and the attention of a handsome man, Julia didn't know why she asked that. Maybe she wanted more attention? Maybe to believe that she was attractive as before. You know, Julia, you are a very beautiful young woman, and I will try to put you on your feet if you will let me, and then it's up to you to decide how we're going to proceed. She nodded her head and looked down at him, thinking how not only was he nice, but also sensible. He didn't say he'd be with her forever. He didn't swear to be faithful to her love like Tony had. He just gave her a choice, but he said he liked her openly, which she couldn't help but be pleased about. And it was at that moment that she realized her past was behind her, gone with her head. Like her Peter did today, "Andrew, thank you so much. You know, your words are like a prayer to me. And I just want to do whatever it takes to get my legs walking again. And you're right, then we'll see what we can do." "What do you mean? That's it for now. Let's go home." He said it so warmly. It made her want to go home with him. But so far it was just her fantasies and daydreams. Though why dreams? She'd have to get back on her feet. And then maybe she'd ride in Andrew's car and look out the window at the trees and the houses of the field flying by. And it would be quiet and peaceful, as it had never been, not even with Tony, who she knew was wholeheartedly in love with her. And how right he'd been when he'd said that her legs would be no barrier to a man in love who wanted her. What's on your mind? My dear sorceress. And why did Julia smiled and looked at the small man sitting next to her, who was ready to outshine the whole world for her? Well, I don't know, I just wanted to call you that. He turned and looked at her with his sky blue eyes. About what? You know, I just want to keep going, keep going, keep going. No. I should stop at a gas station, have a coffee, eat a hot dog, and then get on the road again. Yes, that's an interesting thought. But I, like you, love the road, especially at night or in the evening, when the sun goes down or it's already set, and you're just driving along not knowing where you're going. I hope you know where we're going now. Yes, I think your Carrot Top is waiting for his mistress. And indeed, the cat was already sitting on the porch looking at her, and the chickens were already sitting on the roost, fed and fed by a kind neighbor. Andrew carried her into the house in his arms, then brought the stroller in, asked if he needed anything, and left. And really, she did not need anything now, but just to be alone with her thoughts, to think about how to live on. And what's next? We have to go to a masseur and work on her legs. You're a medical professional, Julia. You do the thinking. She washed her face and lay down on the bed Tony had made. And just when she closed her eyes, she fell into a dream. It had been a long time since she had slept like this, without dreams, without emotions, and almost until noon Julia simply slept. Although it was Monday, and she always set her alarm clock for 7 o'clock, but that one wasn't new to her, where a knock on the door made her wince, being floored. It's Andrew. I didn't catch you at work, and I can't reach you. You're fine. Andrew, come in. It's not locked. I overslept. I'm fine. I was getting worried. Why didn't you tell me you had the day off, by the way? I wasn't planning on it. I don't know why you decided that. I didn't decide that for you. We were seen at the temple yesterday. Then we went to the restaurant. And when I came to your office, I was told on the spot why we're not together, and why am I asking where Julia is? Wow. So by country standards, we're a couple now. And it turns out we are? But by the way, I don't mind this way of putting it. And I'm pleased that we're almost married. You do know, by the way, that we went to the priest yesterday to arrange the wedding? Even so, Julia really didn't even realize that people thought like that. But the thought itself really pleased her. At that moment, she did not feel her own disability and inferiority. And the very fact that she could be with this handsome man was already inspiring. Yeah, we both know what happened yesterday. But be prepared to be questioned about the details of your future celebration. Thank you for the heads up. But Andrew, I'm interested in another fact. Julia, with a habitual movement of her hand, moved the stroller to herself, threw one leg over, then with her whole body moved into it and threw the other leg over. It was as familiar to her as brushing her teeth or peeling potatoes would be to a normal person. I see you don't need any help. You're doing quite well on your own. Yes, it's a habit and a year of training. But that's not what we're talking about. Andrew, I'm interested in something else, and you can help me figure it out, no problem. Say what you need to say. I saw my husband at the temple yesterday. But why did he come? That's what I need to find out. You can approach John. I'm on good terms with him. Unless it's a secret confession, I suppose. Oh, and just so he's not in doubt. Here's my wedding photo and my passport, which still says we're husband and wife. You can tell him my story, that he beat me and now he's here. What's his goal? Maybe he wants to do it again. He wants to hit you. Are you serious? Yeah, the whole village is gonna stand up for you. Andrew, I understand. And that my husband can do anything. He's the kind of man who will stop at nothing. That's one thing. And in terms of my defense, do you have to move in with me or do I have to move in with you? That's great. Let's get your chickens and your cat, get your stuff and go. I have a big house. I don't think Tony would mind. And I feel more comfortable on neutral ground. So if you could just ask John why my husband came here. That's why I came here, by the way. With all this talk, I've forgotten why I came to see you. He told us yesterday that the two of us could come to him. So let's get ready. I'll make you a quick breakfast and get you to the priest. I'm not going yet. Andrew quickly made sandwiches, brewed tea, and invited her to the table. Yeah, look how thoughtful he is. Just like Tony. There's a lot of people to choose from. Are you smiling? That's wonderful. It means you're in a good mood, and your husband's presence around doesn't dampen your mood. Julia, excuse me, why haven't you divorced yet? If you don't want to, you don't have to answer. No, it's simple and trivial. I myself was not eager to file for divorce. And with my legs, I don't have much time to go through the courts. And your husband. But I guess his pride didn't allow him to stoop to the level of having to deal with the issue himself. I'll say this, probably we were both satisfied with this state of affairs. Would you like a divorce? The man's voice sounded calm, but inside him everything was raging. Yes, and understandably, if she does not want to divorce, then, apparently, still loves her husband, and he simply has nothing to do around. And if he does, he has every chance to make her happy. Although, on the other hand, with or without a husband, he will try to make this woman happy. What do you think, Andrew? I think so. Julia nodded her head and ate her sandwich and went outside. She really wanted to divorce her husband, but she was afraid to do it herself. No wonder. After all, Julia knew her husband well, and if he did not like the idea of divorce to be beaten again, and there was no telling what the consequences might be. Andrew left the house, closed the door, and looked carefully at the back of the girl sitting in the wheelchair. Only now he began to understand a little what she had been through. Julia, let me help you sit down later behind the wheelchair and let's go. And you can ask John yourself, by the way. Why did your husband come? She nodded her head and with a familiar movement of her arms around Andrew's neck, who moved her to the front passenger seat. Then he loaded the stroller into the trunk and got behind the wheel. The man had been examining his son for a long time, but was all afraid to show his feelings. Katya, for the last few days, caught her interested look at himself. Of course, it was possible to delicately ask what yes, how. But in the very case intervened the ex-husband of her Julia. Although what ex, if they are still not divorced, and damn him. He came here for a reason, and he went straight to John. John went straight for it. Maybe he really wants Julia back. Have you thought about it? Switching to you. Asked Andrew that your husband Peter wants you back, and therefore went to the priest, but so to speak, with an authority figure to influence you. I thought so. But I know my husband well. He's not used to acting like this. He's rude and mean, even though he has 2 degrees. He was brought up in an intelligent family. But if anything is out of his control, he'll just raise his hand and beat you and that's it. Any constructive conversation is out of the question. That's why I was confused yesterday by his behavior and his reaction to my words. Calm, even humility, and no rudeness. Well, his people were there, witnesses. Maybe that stopped him. Oh no. He beat me up in front of witnesses once. And you can imagine, it was a special treat for him. It was his way of elevating his status, showing he's not beholden to anyone. Yeah, well, if that's the case, his behavior does look suspicious at the very least. I'm surprised you guys made it through the night on your own. All right, we'll go. I'll talk to John. Half an hour later, they were sitting in the courtyard in the priest's gazebo, and John was putting together the table and putting on the samovar. How good of you to come. Just like that without a call. You invited us yesterday, so how could you not come? By the way, Father, Julia has a question for you. You see, here's the thing. Yesterday you were approached by her husband, who, in fact, is responsible for the tragic confluence, for the fact that she does not walk. What kind of husband? Tall, swarthy, in a gray leather jacket. He arrived in a white car. You must remember him. He's quite stately and not like the locals. Julia, I have a lot of people coming to see me, so don't take that as praise. But I really might not have remembered him. No, you were just pulling up. And at that moment he turned around and walked towards you. Yeah, that's right. You see, I know him very well. And there's no way he'd just come here. I'm just afraid he's gonna make me do something terrible. I'm afraid to even guess what it is. Let's just say that in the old days, a word he didn't like could get him beaten up. And the result of that beating is sitting in a wheelchair in front of you right now. I understand you, Julia. You're afraid for yourself. But you can sleep well with this man. He did identify himself as Peter. He came here for a different reason. And that reason is not you. Certainly not to divorce you or any other issue. But what then? I saw him crying. And knowing Peter, he's never cried at his own mother's funeral. And here I'm at a loss to guess. You shouldn't. My dear Julia, this is not a secret confession. So I can tell you the reason why he came here, to soothe your soul and dispel all doubts. The priest stood up and went to the window. He must have been thinking about whether to tell or not, but he realized that the woman was right, and it was worth answering her question. After all, she was his wife and a woman who could really have been maimed by this man. I will tell you the reason why this man came here and decide for yourself if he is threatening you or not. Peter came and asked for my help in removing his sin. And I suppose that sin is you, Julia, what he did to you. Why would he say that? Peter thinks all his unborn children are dead because God has turned his back on him. Those words made Julia shudder. So he had other women, and they slept with him pregnant, but apparently couldn't give birth for some trivial reason. Peter was raising his hand at them. She commanded and hooked her fingers into the handrails of her wheelchair. Julia, I suppose. Do you know why his woman can't give birth? And it's not about God or a curse. Peter still raises his hand to them, like he did to me. When I fell and tragedy struck my legs. I was also pregnant, but the due date was so small I didn't realize it. Thank you for sharing your grief with me. I will definitely pray for your soul and hope that the Lord will give you the strength to stand on your feet and feel the joy of motherhood and find a good man. And you tell me, Julia, did you get married to Peter? No, he was against it, and I didn't really insist. And you know, we're both doctors, so to speak, people of scientific mind. And what advice did you give my husband, by the way? Let that be my secret. And how do you feel about going to church? But I hope you'll come to the temple. I'll try, Father. I really like it here. By the way, Andrew told me you know a doctor who got you back on your feet. Oh, by the way, I'm glad you reminded me. That's not true. A doctor like Emmanuel the Masseur. And he really helped me get back on my feet. I called him this morning, by the way, and he's ready to see me in 2 weeks. He's in advanced training right now, so you're going to have to wait a little while. I really didn't know all the specifics of your situation, because he spread his hands as if apologizing for not being able to fully help her. But thank you. And that's the end of my thanks to you, Father John. What matters to me is that you care about me. And there's the truth. Maybe I'll be lucky enough to go. You will. By the way, I'll give you some experience of my own. When it's warm, you take off your shoes in the morning and walk barefoot. Step on the wet grass dew. It has lasting power. Do you have a lush garden, by the way? As I recall, Anatole's mother used to grow various fragrant herbs, so he will be especially grateful to you. Thank you. Father John, I guess we'll be going. The girl looked intently at Andrew, begging him to get out of here as soon as possible. She didn't know why she wanted to leave so badly. Maybe from the overabundance of information, maybe for some other reason. But Andrew understood it and did not delay. He turned down 6 old friends and took her to her car. Julia, what's wrong? You left the priest's house so quickly. Did he hurt you? No, Andrew, it's okay. I got an answer to my question. And he didn't hurt me in any way. John, honestly, I don't know. But it's like someone was pushing me out of this house. Well, I won't bother you with my attention, and you'll forgive me. I have to run an errand. I'll take you home. I'll drop by tonight, if you don't mind. Sure, I don't mind. He looked in this and all the following evenings, trying to become not just the best friend and assistant, but something more in the life of the girl in whom he fell in love at first sight. And he really didn't care that she was disabled, moving around in a wheelchair. The man was ready to carry her in his arms, but only just. Andrew, you were right, Julia once said. And you and I are already talking. Our nurse Nadezhda asked me today, out of the blue, when are we getting married? Wow. But basically, what do you want? Tony's been telling me that I've been visiting too much. I mean, after all, you're a single girl, you live on your own. You should talk to him. You don't have to. I'm really uncomfortable. It's like I complained about you. That's not a man's habit. She smiled quietly. Really? Tony was right to a certain extent. But on the one hand, she was enjoying the visit. Andrew, by the way, before I forget, Father John got through to his friend, the Monopoly therapist, and booked you in for this Sunday. And by the way, we won't have to travel far. The specialist will come to his temple. Can you have him come down here and take a look at you? Maybe he can really get you back on your feet. Do you still believe in miracles? I'm not much of a doctor, but I wouldn't say no to help. I'd like to think you'll need me on my own, not in a wheelchair. Do you really think so? Andrew looked at her carefully. Yes, he smiled. But behind that smile there was sadness. And it was no coincidence that Andrew ran into Julia's husband again in the temple, who had come not by himself, but with his own position. Yes, a man knows how to choose his women. But I guess it's not fate. Andrew did not want to argue with him in the temple, but simply waited until he went outside, and approaching, quietly said, "We need to talk." Peter looked at the strange man in amazement, but did not argue, but simply asked his companion to wait for him in the car, and stepped aside. "Why did you come here to make fun of a single woman again? I know very well that you are her husband and what you did to her. Are you the reason she's in a wheelchair? No, that's not what I'm talking about. I didn't know anything about my ex-wife being here. I came to see John's father because my girlfriend can't carry my baby. Then first of all, why don't you give her a divorce? And secondly, why don't you support her? She refused my money. I'll file for divorce without her. And maybe Father John is right. We all pay for our sins. And what happened to Nina is my sin, which I'm now buying with my kids. Have you tried just talking to your wife and putting things right? You're probably right. I should come and talk to my wife and ask for her forgiveness, and maybe God will grant us both healing." He lowered his head and walked toward the car, but after a few steps he turned around and shouted toward Andrew, "I'll be there in 2 weeks on Sunday. Give this to Nina." And now the man stood in front of Nina, thinking whether or not to tell her about her husband's visit. But perhaps he should tell her, for his visit might be an unpleasant surprise. And he didn't want to get on the young woman's nerves. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. Really, don't get me wrong. What is it you have to say to me? You're not going to ask me to marry you." "Yes, I've seen your husband. I've been talking to him lately. He's coming next weekend with his woman." A shiver ran down the young woman's spine at those words. And for a second she felt as if an electric shock had slipped through her stiff legs. Had sensitivity returned to them? It couldn't be. It's the stuff of science fiction. Are you saying he's coming here? It's for me. What did he say to you? And how dare you talk to him about me at all? Julia, wait, he came to the temple with a girl, and she keeps losing the baby. He asked the priest for advice, repented that he had committed many sins, and this is his punishment. And wait, my dear man, he wants to come and ask your forgiveness for what he has done. He better give you a divorce. That's what I want with all my heart. He'll file for divorce himself. That's what Peter told me. That's what Peter told me. Why do I have to hear it from you? Julia turned to yelling in anger, though she didn't understand why she was yelling at Andrew. In fact, he had always helped her, and now she was choking with anger, but she couldn't help it. After all, her husband is coming here with his new fling, who will look at her and point his finger and say your wife is handicapped. You realize that he will come here with his girlfriend, his mistress, and that one will point her finger at me and say I am handicapped. What am I supposed to do? You don't. He's not coming here to introduce you and her. He's coming here to apologize to you, silly. Do you understand that? He's going to make up for his sins and give you a divorce to make up for his sins. Ha, that's Peter. Yeah, I wouldn't believe it for the life of me. Julia answered her, what if it's true and he gives you a divorce? Ask sincere forgiveness. It'll help, but I don't know what would make you happy. Andrew, I'll tell you more. I forgave him a long time ago, but now I don't want to see him, especially not with his new girlfriend. And you don't have to meet him. I'll be with you and I'll talk to you in person if you give me the go-ahead. If I have to, I'll tell him all the things you want to say and more. Julia herself did not realize what she wanted. For the truth was, she had forgiven her husband long ago. Let him go, threw him out of her life. And now she finds out like this that he has another woman. They want to have a child, but he didn't want to have children with her. Why is that? Julia, why are you angry? You've accomplished a lot. He will come to apologize on his own. He'll give you a divorce. I lost my legs because of him, of my unborn child. Do you understand that? And now I find out that he took a new wife, wants a child with her, and killed mine. Tears were streaming down her face. After all, she remained an invalid without a family and a child. And he will have everything that she did not have and still does not have. How could she live with such a thing? The woman simply did not understand it. She tried to dull her own pain by working, taking care of people, garden, animals, and this house, everything that surrounds her. I beg you, don't cry. Let's make up our minds. So talk to your husband, and I'll be right there with you, so to speak, as your support. Solve all your issues with him, so you can be calm. Do I have to? I just want to get my divorce and forget it all. Forget it like a bad dream. That's the way it's gonna be. But first, you need to not only deal with your own husband, but you need to get checked out. How would you feel about having him check you out here at home, by the way? Yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm comfortable here, and I think he's used to working from home. Good. Then I'll make arrangements with him and bring him here. And please don't cry, and everything will be fine. And Andrew put his hands on her lap, patted them lightly, and stood up and walked out of the house. Wow, this is news, Julia thought. And so everything started so well. Her husband's arrival, his repentance, the possibility of a divorce, and a box. Woo, what a day. It all came at once, but nothing, we'll figure it out. Carrot Cat poked and began to lose, and her chin encourages her aspirations. Say, mistress, everything will work out. Don't upset her nor looked around and wiped her tears. What's there to say? It's not worth it for old offenses to spoil the life, which began to get better, and the rest. Julia, under what circumstances did you lose the ability to feel your legs? The question embarrassed her, but she was ready for it. Yeah, you know, my husband hit me once. I fell, and I lost feeling in my legs. But there's no fracture, no nerve damage, just a bad bruise, that's all. Doctors say it could be psychosis. But what if they tried? Nothing's working. But I've seen it happen more than once, particularly when working with soldiers coming out of the war. And by the way, there's a solution there. Aggressive massages and applications, mineral water baths. You know, excuse me, what's your name? Oleg, just Oleg. So Oleg, I'm a therapist myself. I've tried a lot of methods of means of techniques, but nothing at all. Well, you haven't had me until now. I'm not a magician, I'm just learning. But I'll try to get you back on your feet, so you're sure I can walk. Julia was lying on the improvised massage table, under which they took a wide bench, and smiled. There's no fracture. The nerves, as you say, are intact, so I don't see any serious reason why you can't walk or feel your legs. So the man pressed a point on her foot, but in such a way that Julia cried out. A current ran through her leg with terrible force, and she could have sworn 220 volts had been run through it. Oleg, did you just run electricity through my body? Electricity? No, I'm working on your active points, which temporarily fell asleep, became inactive, and were responsible for your legs. And what I'm seeing, I like it already. So I can give you back your legs, sensation, and mobility. Now just relax and enjoy. With every massage, with every touch of my hands, the feet didn't chew. They were responding to the touch, becoming docile. She could even move her fingers on the tables already, but she could not yet stand on them fully. Even so, the results pleased her immensely. Andrew, can you imagine? I can feel my legs. I'll be able to walk soon. And that's the best thing that's happened to me lately. But besides the fact that I moved here and met you honestly, you're glad you came here and met me. And that's a no-brainer, isn't it? You have become to me not just a friend and a helper, but something more than a friend. Julia, do you remember what I told you earlier? She looked at him carefully, trying to remember what he might have said to her. But so far it was not coming out well. I don't think you do. But I'll remind you, as soon as you're back on your feet, I'll ask you to marry. Wow, Andrew. I don't even know how I'm supposed to react to that. You don't. Just first stand on your feet, get on your feet without a stick, and then think whether to accept my proposal or not. The young woman smiled and lowered her head, trying to hide her joy in her smile and the bright sparks in her eyes. She had the pleasant words of a man she had been waiting for so long. Yes, I'll think about it then. In the meantime, you will help me to disperse, because how to go to the registry office in a wedding dress and with a stick in his hand? It wouldn't be very pretty. No, it wouldn't. You'd have to match the wand to the dress. And I'll tell you, that could be a problem in particular. If the wand is masculine, not feminine, no stones or flowers, and all that. Wouldn't you agree, Andrew? Yeah, I'll have to figure out where to get you one or have it customized. Well, why don't you tell me how your results with the masseur went? It's great. My legs are regaining sensation. By the way, Andrew, I'm gonna need your help. I have a husband coming to my house this Sunday, and I really don't want to face him alone. Will you be there for me? Of course, I'll always be there for you. And that was the truth. Andrew was practically always there for her. In her darkest moments, Peter never showed up. He didn't want to look her in the eye and apologize, but he did file for divorce, which he notified her about in a little note. That's fine. I'm glad I didn't have to meet you in person, and I forgave you a long time ago. So you're done with your sins. I'll try to take care of mine. In a few weeks, she received a divorce certificate, and 6 months later, she was choosing a wedding dress in a bridal salon. And Tony Julia was there to help her. But why him? You're getting married again. Tony, but you're my friend, and he's my husband-to-be. I invited you to this wedding ahead of time so you wouldn't have to go through the motions. Don't let anything happen to you this time. Tony, you say that again, and I'll beat you up for sure. No, I know you're heavy-handed, so let's just try on a wedding dress and decide which one's best. Otherwise, you'll never pick one. And you're definitely getting married in a tracksuit. Oh yeah, it's so comfortable, and you don't have to worry about matching sneakers. I'll say, the wedding ceremony was modest and quiet with a minimum of guests, but still solemn and beautiful. And of course, they were married in the local church by Father John. And Tony, as an old friend witnessed, Ava's farmhouse to Not On Here are the keys to the house. I've already transferred the deeds to you, and may it be your new family nest. Yeah, thanks, man. Because this is where I met my happiness and got back on my feet in every sense of the word. You're my best friend and comrade. Without you, I would never have been happy. I would have sat in my apartment and spent my days and nights alone. And here. And there's a new happiness waiting for us. Yes, my darling. Yes, my dear man. I couldn't have gotten back on my feet without you, nor without the help of our spiritual advisor, Father John. So please, everyone to our celebration. We've booked a small restaurant, so it's gonna be family style. I don't want any flashy lights. Really, what's she need it for? She's got a family now, a husband, a house of her own, and maybe there'll be kids. Who knows, maybe these places will really help her to get pregnant again and find the joy of motherhood. And let everything be well with Peter. And she at that moment sincerely wished him well, from the bottom of her heart, even in spite of the grief he had brought her. Maybe she wouldn't have met her true happiness without it. Who knows?